So how do we identify what our identity is, what's working and what's not working for us, and how do we start to change our identity to manifest?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I love talking about manifestation first off. So I love that you're bringing it back up because I didn't talk about manifestation in the first part when you asked it. But as far as manifestation goes, I remember hearing about the law of attraction like 2007, 2008 when The Secret came out. And I remember sitting there and being like, all right, so you're telling me that if I just say money's coming into me, money's just going to come into me? Like, that sounds like BS. And I was at USF in college at the time, and I was like, there's no parking at USF. I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to manifest a parking spot. And so the whole way is like a 25-minute drive. I was like, I'm going to get a parking spot. I'm going to get a parking spot. I'm going to get a parking spot. It's going to be right up front. And I literally pull in and someone's pulling out of the very front. I'm like, that's a fluke. There's no way, right? There's no way. Yeah, it's definitely a coincidence, right? And what I've come to find is like, people are always like, here's the steps to manifestation. The way that I think and I'll give you an example of manifestation. I've told you this story. Is I was in Rome in September, and Lauren, my wife, were sitting there, and she's like, "So, the podcast has become this big thing. Like, it's blown up. What are you gonna do? Like, what's it gonna become?" And I was like, "You know what? I think I want to sign with like a bigger company." And she's like, "So what do you want to do? Do you want to go with like Spotify?" And I was like, "Well, Spotify's great, but the problem is I'd have to be Spotify exclusive." She's like, "So what do you want?" And I was like, I'll tell you what I want. I want to sign with SiriusXM. And that's the company I think I'm going to. And I know Lewis just signed with SiriusXM. And I know that they're kind of going into a little bit of the personal development space. I want to sign with SiriusXM. And she's like, cool, what would that look like? I was like, I don't know, but I trust it's going to happen. And I didn't talk to you. Like, we had not, like happy birthday, whatever it was, text messages. You text me 12 hours later, Lewis, 12 hours later after I said, I want to get into a conversation with SiriusXM. And you're like, hey, are you in a contract right now? SiriusXM wants to have a conversation. And I was like, Lauren, look at my phone.
Wow.
But I think the key part of manifestation is not like, I'm going to sit around and money is going to fly from all areas of the universe or any of that stuff. I think it's about alignment. Like, so many people are out of alignment with what they truly want to do. The way that I see life is pretty simple. I think if we were to put it into like an analogy, we basically have this life path, this river, right? Just imagine there's a river, and it's going to take us from one place to another, and that's the journey of life in some sort of way. And I think most people, what they're doing is they're putting boulders in that water, and boulders are limiting beliefs, it's fears, it's going down a life path and deciding to stay somewhere where they don't want to be, it's staying with someone that they don't want to be with. And if you've ever seen a river flows beautifully. And usually people don't drown in rivers that are just flowing. Usually where people drown is when they're in rivers where there's a ton of white water and there's all of these boulders in your water. And that's when it really starts to move fast. So you can drown in the white water. And so I think is when you start to find like this place of alignment, it's like the gentle flowing water, and then things start coming to you. And so it's like, for me, the amount of things that just like kind of happen, you probably had this happen too.
Yeah.
Like opportunities that come to you that are like, I've been wanting this for a while and it came to me better and faster than I thought it was going to. And I think it comes down to like, are people actually in alignment with what they truly want to do? Because I believe personally that all humans are here to create in some sort of way. It doesn't mean they have to create a podcast or create a social media. It could be, create art. It could be that they just create music and it flows out of them. But so many people are creatively constipated where they just hold it all in because they might have been ridiculed at some point in time as a child. They might have, they were afraid of being judged in some sort of way. And I think that every person needs to kind of find like, what's your river? What's the one thing that you can do that is you? Because you don't want to be everybody else, but like, what's the one thing you can do that's completely you, that feels the most authentic to you? And I think that when you find that and you start actually speaking for what it is that you want, it becomes really powerful. And so there's I really believe, and I love that when I was at your event, you had a huge thing that said, I am. And I love I am, because if you look at, like, I'm not religious in any sort of way. I believe, I read the Bible and I read, the Bhagavad Gita. Jay got me to read the Bhagavad Gita like in 2017. So I read that, and there's a lot of things that I associate with it. And one of the things that when you look at the Bible, like the only time when God actually comes and says God's name says, I am that I am. And you look at it and it's like, I am is the only time that God comes in and speaks God's name. And so I think that when we say I am, we are tapping into like that infinite potential that is inside of us. But too often what we're not saying I am, we're saying I am not, or saying I can't. and we're literally closing the door of all of the opportunity that we could attract into our life. And so when we say like, I am going to be one of the best XYZ in the world, I am going to be the best possible father that I can be, I am, if someone's afraid of, oh, I'm going to screw my children up, I am going to be one of the most successful businesswomen and one of the best mothers that I could possibly be. And it literally, I think that the point of attracting things can seem corny, but I think that what happens is when you start to say I am and actually pull it in and you fully believe, like when I believe something, I try to imagine all 40 trillion of my cells saying, yes, we're on board, we're gonna go get this thing. And so when you look at like the potential of a human being that you have, right? I think that if I'm remembering the math correctly, there's 40 trillion cells in your body. Every cell has about 1.4 volts inside of it. If you do the math, that's 70 trillion cells or 70 trillion volts inside of a human body. The most powerful of energy. Potential energy is the key part, right? Is potential energy. So that's 70 trillion volts inside of a human body. And I looked it up. What's the most powerful lightning that's ever been recorded? It's 300 million volts. And when you do the math, 70 trillion divided by 300 million, that means that potential energy inside of a human body, 233,333 times more powerful than a lightning bolt. So if we could take, in my mind, if I could take all of the potential energy in me and say, I'm going to get this thing, and there is no other reality where it exists where I don't get this thing, that's where I kind of like the universe starts to get out of your way and say, okay, here's what you want.
Right. But I think you got to start with the command, which is I am this. And then the command, you need to make a decision because your identity has not been allowing you to attract what you've wanted so far. Or maybe it's taken a longer time than you wanted. So you've got to say, I am this. You've got to make that command. And then you have to make a decision of which actions you're going to start taking differently to support this new commitment. Really, this new commitment of identity, of personality that you want to step in.
Yeah. And how often do people say, I am? And then the next thing that follows it is not powerful. Right? Where it's like, oh, I am I am smart shy. Enough. I'm not smart enough.
Not good enough. Not pretty
enough.
enough.
I'm not lovable.
No.
And that's the majority of people are always saying I am, and it usually follows what they don't want.
Yes.
And so I think with changing the identity is I am and switch it to the thing that you want. And there might be like a BS meter of like, but am I? And you've got to start to actually physically believe it into yourself. I was not confident before I started in sales years ago. I was very shy. I'm still really an introvert. But as you start doing these hard things, you start overcoming things, doing things you didn't want to do, you start becoming more confident in yourself. And as you become more confident in yourself, you can start to speak into reality things that you want more of. And I think that's the important part of manifestation is people can say, oh, there's all of these different things that you can do to manifest. But I really think it comes down to like, can you get your brain and your body on board to say, this is what I'm going to be doing? And if it's on alignment into the life path you're supposed to be on and what feels right inside of you, I think that's where people just naturally start attracting things. And so when you look at like identity, identity is a big piece because it's interesting. We're like brought into this world and we're these perfect beings that are just have no identity. We don't know a name. We don't know what we're supposed to do. And what I always say is that children are not socialized. We're kind of domesticated.